Linux desktop design has a consistency problem, and almost everyone who has used more than one distribution has felt it. You install one distro and everything feels clean and intentional. Then you try another, and suddenly buttons are in different places. System settings are organized in unfamiliar categories, themes clash with applications, and even basic behaviors like right-click menus or file dialogues feel slightly off. None of it is completely broken. In fact, most of it works very well. But the experience is inconsistent in ways that make the entire ecosystem feel fragmented instead of unified. What makes this especially interesting is that Linux is often praised for its flexibility, freedom, and power. And that praise is deserved. The problem isn't that Linux desktops are bad. The problem is that they are too different from one another without a shared design baseline. When you move from a system running the GNOME desktop environment to one using KDE Plasma, you are not just switching themes. You are switching philosophies. GNOME emphasizes minimalism and simplicity. KDE Plasma emphasizes customization and feature richness. Both are excellent in their own way, but they follow different mental models. That difference creates friction for users who expect some level of consistency across the broader Linux world. This inconsistency isn't just about appearance. It's about behavior. In GNOME, you open applications from an overview screen that feels almost mobile-inspired. In KDE Plasma, you might use a traditional start menu layout with categories and favorites. In some lightweight environments like Xfce, the design feels intentionally classic and restrained. Meanwhile, newer projects experiment with dock-centered layouts, tiling integrations, or hybrid models. The result is that Linux desktop doesn't mean one coherent experience. It means a collection of parallel design experiments. Even within a single desktop environment, inconsistency can creep in. GNOME applications generally follow a strict design language using header bars and client-side decorations. But the moment you install a non-GNOME application, maybe something built with Qt instead of GTK, the visual harmony breaks. Button styles shift, window decorations change. Font rendering feels slightly different. Sometimes the file picker looks completely unrelated to the rest of the system. It's subtle, but it's noticeable. This fragmentation largely stems from the toolkit divide. Linux desktop applications are often built using either GTK or Qt. GTK is closely associated with GNOME, while Qt is the foundation of KDE. Applications built on these toolkits inherit different design patterns and styling systems. Even when themes try to bridge the gap, there are always edge cases. Sliders look different, checkboxes behave slightly differently. Context menus have different spacing rules. The user perceives these differences even if they cannot articulate them. Then there's the issue of theming. Linux gives users extraordinary power to change themes. You can swap icon packs, adjust window decorations, modify cursor styles, change fonts, and even redesign the entire shell layout. This freedom is empowering, but it also introduces chaos. Many distributions ship with customized themes that attempt to unify the experience. Some succeed. Others create half-consistent hybrids where system applications look cohesive, but third-party apps don't follow the same visual language. Take a distribution like Ubuntu. It applies its own Yaru theme on top of GNOME to create a distinct brand identity. Meanwhile, Fedora typically ships closer to upstream GNOME defaults. Kubuntu uses KDE Plasma with its own branding tweaks. Each of these systems is technically Linux. Each runs similar kernels and core utilities. But visually and behaviorally, they can feel like entirely different operating systems. For experienced Linux users, this diversity is a strength. For newcomers, it can be confusing. A tutorial recorded on one distribution may not perfectly apply to another. A settings menu in GNOME might live under privacy, while in KDE Plasma it could be nested under workspace behavior or another category entirely. Even terminology differs. Some environments say activities, others say workspaces. Some emphasize extensions. Others emphasize widgets. Consistency matters because it reduces cognitive load. When users don't have to relearn patterns, they can focus on their tasks. On platforms like Windows 11 or macOS, there is a single governing design authority. Applications are expected to follow strict interface guidelines. Deviations are rare and oft discouraged. That centralized control creates a smoother overall experience, even if it limits experimentation. Linux, by contrast, has no central design authority. There is no single body enforcing a universal human interface guideline across all distributions and desktop environments. GNOME has its guidelines, KDE has its own. Elementary OS has another distinct philosophy. But there is no umbrella standard that ensures a GNOME app, a KDE app, and an independent developer's tool will feel native everywhere. The file manager example highlights this perfectly. On GNOME, the default file manager is Nautilus, now officially called Files. On KDE Plasma, it's Dolphin. Both are powerful. Both are polished, but they present information differently. Toolbar placement differs. Sidebar structures differ. Context menu options differ. If a user switches environments, muscle memory no longer applies. This extends to system settings. GNOME settings is streamlined, almost aggressively minimal. KDE system settings is deep and granular, offering extensive configuration options. Neither approach is inherently wrong, but they produce fundamentally different user journeys. In one, you search and toggle simple switches. In the other, you navigate through layered panels filled with detailed controls. Another layer of inconsistency comes from packaging systems. Traditional distribution repositories install applications in ways that may tie them closely to system libraries. Meanwhile, universal packaging formats like Flatpak and Snap aim to standardize app delivery across distributions. While they solve dependency issues, they sometimes introduce visual inconsistencies. Sandboxed apps might not inherit system themes correctly. File pickers might behave differently. Permission dialogues might appear with slightly different styling. Then there's Wayland versus X11. The shift toward Wayland is improving security and modernizing display handling. But transitional states can produce inconsistent behaviors, especially with screen recording tools, window positioning, and fractional scaling. Some apps adapt gracefully. Others don't. Users encounter small irregularities that collectively erode the feeling of cohesion. Even notifications behave differently across desktop environments. The placement, animation style, action buttons, and grouping logic vary. Some environments allow deep customization, others intentionally limit it. The inconsistency isn't catastrophic, but it's ever-present. One of the deeper causes of this issue is philosophical. Linux development is community-driven and decentralized. Different teams prioritize different values. GNOME prioritizes simplicity and opinionated design. Kai prioritizes user choice and configurability. Lightweight desktops prioritize efficiency and performance on older hardware. These priorities naturally lead to divergent design decisions. The result is an ecosystem that feels more like a federation than a single platform. Each desktop environment is internally coherent. The inconsistency arises at the boundaries between them. When users stay within one environment, the experience can be excellent. But when they cross boundaries, installing apps from different ecosystems, switching distributions, or mixing toolkits, the seams become visible. For content creators and developers, this creates challenges. If you design an application, which guidelines do you follow? If you strictly follow GNOME's human interface guidelines, KDE users might feel the app doesn't integrate well. If you use Qt for its flexibility, GNOME users might notice styling differences. Trying to satisfy everyone often results in compromises that fully satisfy no one. The community has made efforts to improve cross-desktop consistency. FREEDESKTOP.org standards aim to unify things like desktop entries, icon naming, and system tray behavior. Universal themes attempt to bridge GTK and Qt styling gaps. Portal systems aim to standardize file pickers and permission dialogues across sandboxed apps. These initiatives help, but they don't eliminate the deeper philosophical differences. There's also branding fragmentation. Some distributions heavily customize the look and feel to stand out. Others stay close to upstream projects. A newcomer might not even realize that Ubuntu and Fedora share the same underlying desktop environment in certain editions, because the visual presentation differs enough to suggest entirely separate systems. Ironically, Linux's greatest strength choice is directly tied to its consistency problem. Freedom allows experimentation. Experimentation produces innovation. But innovation without convergence can produce fragmentation. The challenge is finding a balance where diversity doesn't undermine usability. The inconsistency problem also affects enterprise adoption. Organizations value predictability. When deploying thousands of desktops, they want stable, uniform interfaces. While it's possible to standardize on a single distribution and desktop environment, the broader ecosystem's fragmentation can make long-term planning feel uncertain. Will a future GNOME release remove a feature your workflow depends on? Will a KDE update reorganize settings categories? The pace of change, combined with differing philosophies, introduces unpredictability. From a user experience design perspective, consistency builds trust. When UI patterns repeat, users gain confidence. In Linux, that confidence is often localized rather than universal. You trust your chosen environment, but not necessarily the ecosystem as a whole. Yet, it's important to acknowledge that progress has been made. Modern GNOME releases feel more cohesive than they did a decade ago. KDE Plasma has dramatically refined its visual polish and workflow consistency. Many distributions now invest heavily in design teams, branding guidelines, and usability testing. The situation today is far better than it was in the early 2000s. Still, the perception persists. When someone says, Linux feels inconsistent, they're usually reacting to the cross-environment differences rather than the quality of any single project. The experience can feel like moving between different neighborhoods in the same city, each with its own architecture and traffic rules. Solving this problem doesn't necessarily mean eliminating diversity. It might mean establishing stronger cross-project collaboration on shared interface principles. It might mean encouraging developers to test applications across multiple desktop environments before release. It might mean refining toolkit theming systems to ensure deeper compatibility. Ultimately, Linux desktop design's consistency problem is not a sign of failure. It's a reflection of its decentralized nature. But as Linux continues to attract new users, especially those migrating from Windows or Mac OS, the pressure to deliver a smoother, more predictable experience will grow. The question isn't whether Linux can innovate. It clearly can. The question is whether it can align enough of its innovations to feel like a unified platform rather than a constellation of brilliant but loosely connected projects. Until that alignment strengthens, the consistency problem will remain part of the Linux desktop story, an ecosystem defined by freedom, creativity, and power, but still searching for a shared design language that makes it all feel like one cohesive whole.